What is up there, you guys? Welcome back to Sylvester. Today I'm going to share my top 5 favorite business books. I'm going to share what I learned from each of them, I'm going to give a brief history of them, and I'm going to kind of share why they are important to me as a businessman. With that, let's jump right in. Okay, so starting with last first, which would be number 5, we have The Millionaire Mind by Thomas Stanley. Now this book was a very recent purchase of mine. It is available both in a print copy, like the one I have, or it is also available online. You can get it on Audible or any other audiobook type of dealer. In a brief background to this book, the author interviewed lots and lots of millionaires. Some of the things that he was looking for is how do their minds work? What was their thought processes behind their moves? Why did they choose one direction versus another direction? And also, finally, what drives a millionaire? So the reason that I like this book is that I like to read it because I want to make sure that my mindset is correct. I'm heading into a very difficult field of study, which is how to become a millionaire. And in doing that, I want to figure out how a millionaire's mind works and make my mind copy their mind. If I can learn how their mind functions, it becomes a lot easier for me in becoming a millionaire. In this book, there are chapters on success factors, there's chapters on school, on work, on courage, on choosing a spouse, etc. All kinds of different chapters. Those are a couple examples. I have found that to be an excellent book and I really recommend that you guys go and check that out. Number 4. This book is a duo, which means there are 2 of them. This book is entitled Letters of a Self-Made Merchant to His Son by George Horace Lorimer, or also known as Old Gorgon Graham, which is his second book, both of which I'm going to be covering here. Now, they're 2 completely different stories, but they're basically the same book, so I went ahead and threw them both into one category. As a brief backstory, this book was recommended to me by my parents. This was one of the very first business books I ever read. Now, at the time, I was just getting ready to head into college, kind of start a career, and so I was a little bit unsure how to do that, or what not to do, or what to do. And I needed some common sense advice or some mentorship that would help me go through college. This book shares letters written by a wealthy merchant to his son. And during the majority of the time, this son is in college, just graduated college, or just starting his professional career. Also during the second book, it covers from about the time the son gets really good at his job until he gets married. So it's kind of an interesting portion of this young son's life. Now, the author is a very amusing writer and he makes me laugh all the time when I'm reading it. So I would highly recommend that you guys go and check those 2 books out. Priceless read. Those are very well done. Now, next up we have number 3. And number 3 is entitled Richest Man in Babylon. Now this book was the first and probably the most powerful or influential business book that I have read to date. It was this book that I listened to during my most trying times, my most difficult work. Whenever I felt like failing, it was this book that I would listen to. Now, diving straight into the book itself.
Here's what it looks like. That's what it says. No, just kidding.
Basically, this book contains a whole ton of fundamental steps for any business and anybody looking at going into business. This book is super simple, super easy to read, and makes complete sense when you're reading through it. In this book, it walks through 7 principal steps when building wealth. It also covers very intriguing business stories from that era, which is the Babylonian era, kind of in a Babylonian theme. Very fascinating how their logic and mindset worked back then and how those same principles can be implemented both in business then and in business today. So this book was absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend anybody looking at getting into business to go ahead and read this book because it is so simple, so concrete. It really helps when starting a business. Basically, if you do not read any of the other books here, read this book. Alright, so that's that one. And now for the runner-up, which is number 2, for those of you not keeping along, we have The Dry Divide by Ralph Moody. Now, this book is the 7th book in an 8-part series that basically is an autobiography of the author, Ralph Moody, going through his life in the very early stages, basically while he was growing up. As a brief history to this book, his father ended up dying when he was about 12 years old. Now, this had a big and lasting impact on him. The biggest reason it had an impact on him was that he had to then take care of his mother and a whole ton of younger siblings. There became a lot of mouths to feed, bills to pay, money to be earned, etc. This boy had absolutely no choice but to become a businessman at that early age. And kind of during those 8 books, he kind of goes into all of his experiences growing up. What he did right, what he didn't do right, what were the lessons he learned along the way, who were his mentors, that type of thing. In the 7th book, which is this book that I've listed among my top 5 business books, he goes into his experience in starting a wheat threshing / harvesting company. Now, I highly recommend that you read all 8 books, but above all the other 8, this one stands out. Because in this book, he begins the book with about, I believe it's 10 cents in his pocket, and by the end of the book, he's worth thousands, which in their day is worth a lot more than it is today. Now, like all the other books, this book can be found on Audible, it can be found online, wherever you want to get it. It's a pretty popular book. So this brings us to number 1. Now, this book, I feel, is the most important book that anyone could read on the topic of business. I have read this book at least 10 to 20 times, and I still listen to the audiobook even to this day as I'm driving in the car here and there and everywhere. The book that I'm talking about is none other than Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Now, this book tells a story of 2 dads, and each dad had a son, the author and his best friend whom he calls Mike. Now, each dad brings a different mindset to the table. One has a rich mindset, the other has a poor mindset. Now, as each boy grows up, each dad teaches what he has learned to their sons. They learn both the positive and the negatives of each dad's perspective. This book, above all others, was the one that inspired me the most. In fact, I'm actively following the principles taught in this book. So, I highly recommend that you take out the time and read this book because it will change your perspective on the way you view things and kind of give you some ideas, if nothing else. Well, that's it. Just as a recap, there are 5 books as follows. The Millionaire Mind, Letters of a Self-Made Merchant to His Son by George Horace Lorimer. Richest Man in Babylon by George S. Clason. The Dry Divide by Ralph Moody. And Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Those are my top 5 business books. If you read each of those books, I feel that you will have a pretty decent understanding of the fundamentals that go into creating and running a business. In my opinion, this will really help you, as it will put you directly in the line of success and it will aid you as you go throughout your business and your career. Well, that's all for this week. As always, like it if you like it, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll catch you next Thursday.